Direct Line Show. Our special guest today is Ambassador James Gilmore to the United States. He was the ambassador to Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 2019. However, he was also Attorney General of the great state of Virginia from 1994 to 1997, Governor from 98 to 2002, RGA Chairman 2000 to 2001, RNC Chairman 2001 to 2002, and he was one of our most successful Lincoln Day dinner speakers in Montgomery County when he spoke.
Yeah, I'm beginning to suspect that Dwight considers the fact that you're the most successful speaker the most important of all your accomplishments. Forgive me, that seems to be just a little on the parochial side.
Well, look, the chicken was really great that night, so I think that's probably what did it.
Yes.
I've started to learn as I've gotten more involved in the politics at all these dinners. Chicken is the
actually we do filet mignon and steak.
Nobody wants to go like rebellious and throw in a cheeseburger or something.
Listen, we really have a lot to talk about it, and I think one of the most interesting things is the testimony. I mean, obviously we've got the package, the 3.5, and the infrastructure package. But we were talking as we were coming online about the testimony of the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, Milley. And it really probably is a nice pivot point to a number of issues. Ambassador, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I came into watching that presentation in the U.S. Senate very skeptical because I felt that General Milley, if it was true what was reported in this book by Bob Costa and Bernstein, and that he had basically gone off on his own and called the Chinese because he thought that President Trump was crazy, that was a very serious allegation. Now, Milley denied that on camera and said, look, I was in touch with the Trump people, Mark Meadows, the Secretary of Defense, and I was simply communicating with my compatriot because I was directed to try to reduce the tension. Well, now, if that's true, that makes me feel a lot better. But it doesn't really allay my complete concerns about General Milley. He seems awfully political. He started this whole business off by criticizing the Confederate soldiers, and I was thinking I started watching him when he did that. Because I was thinking to myself, well, you can argue about whether the Confederate soldiers were traitors or whether they were doing something different and, whether the statues ought to be, you can argue about all that kind of stuff, but he has no business doing it.
Absolutely. And not to make your fears a little bit more, factual, but I believe I read earlier today that he doubled down and stood by that comment and saying that he would still call China and warn them of an imminent attack.
Well, not unless he's directed to do so. The fact is that the commander-in-chief, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's Joe Biden, is his boss, and he cannot take policy decisions like that. I mean, I was ambassador in Europe, in Vienna, and the idea of my calling a high representative of a foreign government and expressing my own opinion and policy would be unthinkable. Mm-hmm. You just wouldn't do that. And frankly, then I was a civilian diplomat, which might have been more justified, but the fundamental principle is that we do not allow the military to engage in partisan politics or any politics in the United States. It implies military takeover. You can't allow that to happen. And it worries me about this. First, the Confederate thing, and then he goes on and does all the book interviews. Then he comes on and says, well, I'm going to call the Chinese if I decide that that's what I want to do. These are not good things. And I'm worried about it and very concerned. And I think that, frankly, that Joe Biden ought to let him go. And the fact that he's not is a failure of presidential leadership, because Absolutely. You have to sustain this point of the separation between the military and the political activities of the United States.
Now, something that they should have been doing, and that they both Milley and McKenzie mentioned in their testimony today, which is in contradiction to what Joe Biden said, is that they both told Joe Biden directly that we need to keep about 2,500 troops in Afghanistan. And Biden, of course, had come out saying, no one ever told me that. No one ever told me to leave troops in Afghanistan. That's why we pulled everybody out. So that's something that they should have been doing. And it sounds like, if we're taking them at their word, that they did, in fact, tell Joe Biden, which to me sounds pretty plausible. I would think, people of their ranking who've been involved in the military for that long would advise such a thing. So What's your take on that? And you think Joe Biden's blatantly lying, or does he really just not remember being told that, which is also
this is the most important thing that came out of the interview, obviously, the fact that there's a contradiction between what the military said they were telling the president and what the president is telling the public that they told him. This is a very direct contradiction, and we got to get to the bottom of it. It may be that the president just doesn't remember anymore. It might be that's what's going on. Or he may have been just trying to justify his decision after the fact. I think the dramatic point is that the military came in and directly contradicted the commander-in-chief. Once again, that's very dramatic. And it's the most important thing. I think we've got to get to the bottom of it as to what happened there. But I got to tell you that I don't believe that all these generals would be of one mind of saying that leaving a military presence in Afghanistan would be the right policy. I just think they didn't get their stories together and tell a lie. I think that the president is either kind of not remembering anymore or he's not telling the truth. It's the president on this. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it's the most dramatic piece of information that came out of the hearings.
One of the other aspects to this, and this is this chain of command issue, and I kind of there are multiple approaches to it, but this is the conversation with Speaker Pelosi with Milley, where she expressed concern about the president and tried to essentially interfere or get involved with the chain of command as well. I mean, that's disturbing, but I think that it sets up, I think, as we're talking about this idea that somehow political circumstances can justify an interruption of the what is the appropriate chain of command.
It is. I actually thought I maybe was the only person that saw that. This is a really again a very serious matter. I've been focusing on General Milley for a long time, and I still am. But what came out, and the information that's come out, is that the Speaker of the House of Representatives called the military directly in order to undermine the authority of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief. We're really without basis. Just because President Trump had policies that Pelosi didn't agree with gives her no justification for calling the military and basically trying to direct them to no longer follow the chain of command. That is a very serious matter. Much more serious than some guy with buffalo horns running around in the Capitol or even General Milley. This is much more serious because the Speaker of the House of Representatives is actually at that point kind of engaging in a soft coup. I don't like that much at all. And she really, to be honest with you, let's be direct about this. Speaker Pelosi ought to resign over that. That's an undermining of the American democracy. She's in violation of her oath, and really she should go on and release her position at this point and go back to California.
If not, be tried for treason. Now, and I'm sure, obviously, with so much going on in the mainstream media to cover up all the bad that Democrats do, is there any reason why that it took so long for that to come out, that Milley didn't blow the horn on that beforehand, if this is such a horrible thing that she did, which it is?
Well, Milley, once again, was in full justification mode, and I was listening to him pretty closely, and he allayed some of my anxieties. I was on the warpath over this, but when he spoke, he made his case as to what he thought, and what he said was that he told the speaker, listen, I'm not qualified to say that the president is crazy. I'm going to take my orders from the president. So he was basically brushing Pelosi off. Now, you raised a different question, and that is, should he have informed the political leadership of the country that was occurring? If he did not make a report on that again is very problematic, because it implies that he's in league with the speaker to try to undermine the election, the elected officials of this country. And that, I just think it can't be more serious than what we're just describing right now.
One of the fascinating aspects of this is the fact that so much of it has become public, and among the reasons that it has become public is that Milley, as he acknowledged in his testimony, has been talking to reporters, talking to authors, and basically, publicizing a lot of this stuff. And it's not, as you said, speaking to superiors, it's sort of in this mode of sort of justification, as though not really appreciating the gravity of what he's been involved with.
He's just too engaged in the politics of this country. All these things that we've been talking about are matters of public debate. Ultimately, they're going to be put before the public in an election, maybe next year, maybe in future years. This is all politics. The United States military is not to be engaged in the political system of the United States. It raises a very great danger that we see in country after country after country. Never been thought of in the United States before, never been considered. I'm even uncomfortable with all the conversation that's going on about coups. I don't like that because it makes it imaginable. And up to this point, it has not been imaginable in the United States of America. The principle is inviolate, it's firm, and I believe that that General Milley has been entirely too political and is continuing to be, apparently.
So what do you anticipate as the outcome from these hearings, if anything, whether that's from the original intent being what happened in Afghanistan or any of the other fallout from some of the other things that he's said during his testimony?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen because nothing has happened yet. It's already a failure of presidential leadership that General Milley is still in his post. Does Joe Biden say that this is okay with him? Would it be all right with him if the United States military starts freelancing on policy and not reporting to the commander in chief, not getting the authority from the commander in chief or from the White House? I don't think Joe Biden, even in his present state, would agree to something like that. I think he would not tolerate something like that. No presidential commander in chief would. Now, I want to say for the second time, I want to give Milley credit. He, in his presentation, made his case as to why he thought he was on firm ground, but he has not addressed the issue of this constant political involvement by General Milley in the political system of the United States, which is not appropriate. And it's, frankly, that was too gentle. It's not acceptable.
Well, thank you on that. One of the interesting things about the hearing was at least in this environment, it was pretty bipartisan. I mean, the questioning was very serious, and I think the concerns were expressed across the aisle, and I think that was encouraging, but I also think it underscores the gravity of the whole range of issues that we're talking about.
Well, I think that's right. And I think the Democrats have to run for election too. And sooner or later, they're going to have to stand before their various states and justify what they did at this particular point in time on these issues. So they have an obligation to come out here and say, look, let's get to the bottom of this. We're not just Democratic lackeys. We're United States senators, and we have an obligation to serve our constituents. So I can understand that. In fact, it's rather nice, isn't it, that they're willing to do their jobs, but they're still not that tough. For example, Elizabeth Warren, just went into full defense mode here and really did not do her job.
So speaking of our elected officials doing their jobs, to stay on the local domestic policy for a little bit, we're staring down the very real likelihood of another government shutdown this week, with the potential of us not passing the reconciliation plan or the infrastructure bill. And it looks like Pelosi has gone back on her word to the progressives today. What gravity does that have? What weight does that have when we're facing a potential government shutdown, when both chambers of Congress as well as the White House are within the same party? That's not really something you see very often.
I don't know how the shutdown thing goes on. Right now, the Republicans are putting the case out that they think the Democrats are proposing too much spending. That's really been the subject of what we're talking about here. The $1.2 trillion infrastructure, everybody loves infrastructure. But I think it's also admitted that the infrastructure bill, the bulk of it is not infrastructure.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the piece that everybody seems to want to pass because it says infrastructure. But then you got another 3.5 trillion coming behind it that's just social welfare spending. And I think people are not happy about that. I think they feel very uncomfortable about it. Look, I was thinking about this afternoon. This is all Bernie Sanders stuff. Bernie Sanders ran for president of the United States and he failed. So we have no obligation at this point to have him be the president of the United States and put his ideas forward and force his ideas down the throat of the American people. He's not the president, but he's insisting upon this high socialist government spending that they're talking about doing. Now, the result of that is obviously going to be inflation. There's no question about it. You can't put this kind of money into the from the government into the economy and not have inflation. People are noticing it now. People are noticing it at the pump. They're noticing it at the grocery store. The American people, the people of Maryland, are noticing this.
Right.
And it's a serious, serious problem. And I think their position is we could just spend anything we want to. And they've got this moment when they have a bare minimum majority in the House and the Senate and the White House, and they think they can transform all of society. Well, the country is divided right now. This is not the time to just try to make America a socialist country. This is not the time to try to do that when you're really evenly divided. If they had 75% and they wanted to say, okay, we're going to be socialists now, they might have some justification, but they're really not there. They can barely get across the finish line, and which is why Senator Manchin and Senator Sikkema of Arizona are so critical, because they have to have every vote because they're split even, basically.
Well, it also, the indication in the House is they're badly divided as well.
The progressives and the moderate Dems.
The progressives and the moderates. And it will be an interesting couple of days. Interesting, we did not also talk about the debt limit, but that's the debt ceiling is yet another of those many deadlines that's out there. But I wanted to come back to Afghanistan because we really haven't had a chance to talk much about that. And drawing upon your experience working with our allies, the effort in Afghanistan was, of course, a NATO undertaking. It was something that was joint with many countries participating to varying degrees. And could you elaborate a little bit on the impact that that's had on with our allies, and also the potential impact among our adversaries as to where they see the United States?
Now, once again, I did write an article on this that was published on foxnews.com last week, in which I put, I think, a pretty thorough analysis of the situation. First of all, this was a terrible thing that the president did to bring people out chaotically like that, running from the enemy, running and hiding, abandoning not only Americans, for crying out loud, but also all these people who put their faith in us for over 20 years. That we were going to stand behind them while they were trying to create a better country. Now, you could say, well, the fact that they collapsed so fast told you that they never were going to build a decent country, and I don't think that's true. I think that women were being educated, they were going to college, they were going to school, people were standing up for what was right. They put their faith in us, and we pulled the rug out from under them. Now, that creates a stain on the American people. I don't actually know how you can wash that stain off, to tell you the truth. I think that it's a permanent stain on the people of the United States. And they ought not to like that. The people of this country ought not to be a stained people. They're noble, faithful, courageous people, the people of the United States of America. They shouldn't have been treated like that, that we would be not just embarrassed, but actually stained as a result of this. Now, to come to the point, the implication that I see in the Afghan pullout as the ambassador to OSCE, I was watching all this quite closely for 2 years on behalf of the United States. And it was, by the way, a nonpartisan thing that I was doing over there. I was not being a Republican. I was actually working with the Democrats too, including, by the way, your own Senator Cardin, who was very committed to OSCE and committed to my ambassadorship. Well, the bottom line is, when the United States looks that weak, disorganized, chaotic, unfaithful, disloyal, even willing to have our allies murdered, the problem with that is that right now the international situation is very fragile. Mm-hmm. I want to tell your listeners right now, and I'll tell everybody that wants to hear me, we're in danger of an actual real war right now, a real war. Not a play war, not a small thing, a war either with China or with Russia. And that's because the Chinese have made up their minds. They are going to take Taiwan sooner or later. The Russians appear to have made up their minds. they cannot live next door to a democratic Ukraine. And therefore, they're determined to take Ukraine. The question is, why haven't they done that? Either one of them. My view is that they have not done that because they think the risk of doing one of those two dramatic things is too high. The risk is too high. In Europe, where I was and was very devoted to that work over there, they don't want to take a risk of going to war with NATO. In China, they've got to get across that Taiwanese Strait while the United States Navy is still there. They don't want to take that risk. But if they think the United States is going to pull back and go home and fold, the risk becomes more acceptable to both the Russians and the Chinese. They may decide that now's the time. They're not going to wait around for another election where Biden may be out and a more decisive president may be in. This is maybe the time. I'm a little less worried about it in the Pacific because I think the Chinese think they have lots of time. Actually, I don't agree with that, but they think they have lots of time. I think the Russians think they're on a very short fuse. If they don't do something to reassemble the old Soviet Union, the old Russian Empire, I think the Russian people are going to throw Putin and his people out. And I think they know that. The Russian people are not going to live as serfs forever and ever and ever. So I think the Russians are on a short time frame. I think that they're very desperate about Ukraine. Last several months, they put 100,000 soldiers on the border with Ukraine, which was a direct warning. Again, I was very steeped in that over in Europe. So I'm worried right now. I'm worried right now that President Biden's reckless conduct in Afghanistan has worked on the minds of the Chinese and the Russians, and that they may do something really stupid. Because if they make a mistake, if they do one of those two invasions or both of them, and the United States and its allies does respond, then it's game on. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. Not them, not us. But this is a very fragile moment.
And it, of course, strikes me, and I think you referenced this in the article, that so many of the countries that are part of the coalition to oppose this were also our allies within Afghanistan and have to take the measure of the commitment of the United States. So, we look at, of course, it was a NATO engagement, and NATO would be crucial to being able to stand up to the Russians in the Ukraine.
Yes, but nobody wants a war in Ukraine. Nobody. So the goal here is not to go to war with Russia. We should not be trying to do that.
Certainly.
The goal is to deter the Russians from doing something stupid that forces a war. That's got to be the American policy. I think the Afghanistan humiliation was the opposite of what that policy ought to be.
But what does that deterrent look like if we've now already, have this reputation of, we have that stain, as you put it, of what went on in Afghanistan, and it doesn't seem like Biden would be the type to take a stronger stance or to send Kerry out there to talk to Putin and be like, listen, we are not going to tolerate a war in Ukraine. So what options do we have? And how can our allies trust that we would stand by those options?
Well, as I said in the article, we need to take some affirmative action right now to support Taiwan and support Ukraine and make it very obvious that that's what we're doing. And in many ways, we are doing a lot of that. I was very pleased this week with the decision to sell the submarines to Australia and to create a new coalition of the United Kingdom and Australia and the United States. Now, the French didn't like it at all, but that was the right move because it sends a direct message to the Chinese that the United States is serious about Taiwan and serious about keeping peace in the Pacific. Now, it was a complete diplomatic failure to annoy the French the way that we did. I will tell you that when I was in Europe, I worked with my own Quad. There's been a lot of talk here this past week about the Pacific Quad. Well, there's a European Quad, and the European Quad is the Americans, the French, the Germans, and the British. And I met with them every week in person, every week. And we always understood that we were on the same team and we had the same objectives and the same goals. So the French are our allies. They're difficult people. I admit that. They have great chefs, but they're challenging people. I understand that, and they get awfully prickly. But the fact is, there was no need there to embarrass the French. and to drive them into this kind of diplomatic chaos. I just think that diplomatically, the United States just isn't getting the job done right now.
And it makes you question. I mean, it's not like Biden or Kerry or many of the people, Mayorkas, are new to the political scene. You know, they've been working in politics in D.C. for decades. How is it that we're failing so spectacularly at our diplomacy with other countries right now?
I just don't know. I remember that Admiral Stavridis, who I've been watching from time to time, he comes on. He's a big Democrat, and he came as soon as Trump went out and Biden came in. He went on TV and said, "Well, amateur hour is over." Well, Admiral, I think that's not true. I think amateur hour is going on right now. It just doesn't feel like that they're capable of understanding the chess game. Believe me, we are in a game here, a geopolitical chess game. And it includes economics, communications, diplomacy, military, all of that. Our adversaries understand that you take the full range of all elements of national power and you apply it against your adversary, and they believe we are their adversary. So we have to understand all this. You can't segment it out. But right now, diplomacy is very important. In fact, I will tell you that before I became an ambassador, I didn't fully appreciate the value of diplomacy. Diplomacy is about communication. It's about sending a message. It's about sending warnings. It's about sending opportunities for cooperation and agreement. It's for dealing with respect. Now, I wasn't dealing with the Russians every day while I was in Vienna with the OSCE, and I was very strong about it. In terms of standing up for the United States of America in that organization. Well, the Russians listened to what I was saying. It was sending a message on behalf of the United States of America. And while I'm at it, I might as well tell you that I never was disrespectful of the Russians in Vienna, never. They're a player, and they have to be taken into consideration. I think they're entitled to due respect.
Sure.
But it doesn't mean that you go along with their ultimate goals, their ultimate objectives. Our ultimate objective is to make sure that Europe is at peace, but also free, and that these countries that are newly independent of Russia are able to maintain their peace and sovereignty and independence and freedom. That's the American goal. Now, why would we do that? It's idealistic, to be sure, but it's more than idealistic. It is in the American national security interest, the safety of the American people, that we follow a policy like that, both in Europe and, of course, also in the Pacific.
I wonder if, to a certain extent, part of the issue here is an attempt on the part of the Biden administration to pivot the priorities for foreign policy. We heard that expressed at the outset, the issue, the concern about making, or the big climate change, as you know, by definition or by implication, I guess, to give security issues a lower priority. So the issue is to engage with the Chinese on climate change. Certainly the role of petroleum fossil fuels is critical for the Russians. Can that be part of the issue, part of the explanation, that they're really less concerned about security than prior administrations have been? Well,
the issue of climate change can be continued to be discussed and debated. As to the appropriateness of it, or what we should be doing. I mean, you can shut off all fuel in the United States of America, and the air is still going to be dirty because of China.
Right.
So we have a lot to do on that. But I insist that you cannot put aside the geopolitical security issues in the world today, no matter what other issue you want to deal with, whether it's race or equality or climate change, or any of these other social issues. They cannot simply overpower the geopolitical consequences of what's going on in the world. Because one thing I know for sure, and that is that the Chinese and the Russians have a intention. They have a national policy they intend to execute. It is not in the American national interest. So we have to consider that and to be in a position to protect the people of the United States. Let me put a little nice spin on it for a minute, though. I will report to you all, based on my experience in Europe. First of all, we do have friends, and we do have a lot of people that are looking to us for leadership in good faith. And the United States is always the big player in the room, always. The Russians aspire to be the big player in the room. The Chinese, I think, wish they could be one of these days. but they're not. The United States of America is the most powerful country in the world, economically and militarily, and in our moral justification. The people that are newly freed from Russia, they are looking to us for leadership in keeping them free, keeping them from having the KGB knock on their door in the middle of the night. They are looking to us because they believe that we will do what's right. That is a very powerful thing. Once again, it's diplomacy. They believe in what we believe in and our values and our goals and objectives, and that draws them to us. And that adds more national power to the United States and to our national goals when we have friends. I believe in that fundamentally.
And I think that that's a great position for us to be in. But then, of course, that renews that worry of just with the way things are going now, how long will we be seen as that big player in the room? I mean, unfortunately, we're less than a year into Biden's presidency, and look where we're at now. What seat in the room are we going to have 3 years from now? We're going to be the ugly duckling in the back corner that nobody wants to sit with.
No, the bad news is we are damaged. We are stained. And I don't know how you fix this, frankly, other than maybe some elections somewhere up the road and a change of policy and a change of leadership, but somewhere up the road, because I just don't think you can fix this with this president. I just don't think you can. I think this is a fundamental error that he's made that has hurt the United States of America. The good news is, don't kid yourself. The United States is still the big boy everywhere. And there are most of the people of the world want us to be the most powerful country in the world. They want us to be that person.
Yep.
Okay. They want that. So we have a lot of advantages that have been built up for a long period of time, and we're not going anywhere. The United States isn't going anywhere. We're going to be okay, but we keep screwing up, and it just takes a little off of us when we really need to have the maximum effort on our own behalf.
Speaking of elections, let me transition a little closer to home. In particular in Virginia. And obviously that race has really heated up. I keep reading stories of, I can only interpret it as sort of panicked media in response to the fact that Glenn Youngkin seems to be coming along very strongly. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I watched the debate. And I've been watching the race. Naturally, I'm supportive of Glenn Youngkin to be the governor of Virginia. Of course, you would expect that. My observation is that the polling may be right and it may be moving in our direction. The debate last night, I thought Terry McAuliffe looked panicky, looked strident and shrill. They're just not acting like they are ahead, the Democrats. They're acting like they're behind. This lieutenant governor's candidate for the Democrat, I'm not sure what her name is actually, but she's running an ad against Winsome Sears, where they put her up there and they talk about what a bad person she is. I really feel like that's sort of a veiled racism, to be honest with you, to put that up there. They're sort of implying don't vote for the black woman. I think that's a terrible thing, and it's a little desperate, I think.
Yeah.
If you're 20 points ahead of Winsome Sears, why are you attacking her and throwing her picture up there and making her look bad? Why are you doing that? As for Jason Miyares, when I ran for attorney general way back in the day, I ran on law enforcement. That's what Jason Miyares is doing. And I think it's very, very effective. And he's got plenty to talk about. So finally, on the governor's race, I think Glenn Youngkin looked very polished, very poised, and very gubernatorial. And I thought that Terry McAuliffe looked desperate, kept trying to say Trump, Trump, Trump over and over again, when really this race is between Terry McAuliffe and Glenn Youngkin. And I think maybe Glenn Youngkin is going to win this thing.
Absolutely. And you can even tell because the one headline that I'm seeing time and time again on Facebook after the debate has nothing to, obviously, yes, that Glenn was great, Glenn won, is what my friends are saying. But the only headline that you're seeing in the news is Terry McAuliffe tells parents that parents have no right to determine what teachers teach students in school. That's what I'm seeing in the headlines. And honestly, that's a problematic thing to have attached to your name.
Well, let me address that because it was the most important thing that came out of the debate. Right. You're quite right about that. And I've done many of these debates, including presidential debates. And the conventional wisdom is you probably can't win these debates, but you can sure lose them. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that McAuliffe lost that debate over that comment. Here's why. the Republicans have not been getting the suburban vote in Virginia over the last number of elections, particularly women in places like Fairfax and Loudoun and Rico.
And I just, not to interrupt you, but I did look it up. When you ran, you carried Fairfax County.
Yes, I did. I carried
It's a different Fairfax County, but
no,
yes.
it's the same Fairfax County. They just loved the car tax cut in Fairfax County. They just loved it. But and Glenn Youngkin is now talking about tax cuts, which is new. That we haven't been talking about tax cuts in a long time. The senators we're talking about, both in Maryland and in Virginia, are all just goo da about raising spending and raising taxes to pay for it. That's the conventional wisdom. When I ran on the car tax cut, we were talking about the taxpayer. Glenn Youngkin is talking about the taxpayer. This is new. This is different. And the point is, though, with regard to taxes, you've got to get people in the suburbs voting Republican. Well, what's exciting, what is concerning to the people in the suburbs? Their sons and daughters going to school. That's what they're worried about. We've seen now with the whole critical race theory that the schools are being converted into indoctrination, to indoctrinating kids. Mothers and fathers don't want to send their kids to school to be indoctrinated. They don't want that. They don't like the idea that they have no say in their children's education. They have no say in it at all. So yesterday, Terry McAuliffe said that. It was an astounding thing for him to say, but and Glenn's going to kind of focus the people in those communities on that because it's going to people care a lot about that. I think it's one of the key issues. If the people of Fairfax, Loudoun, Henrico, Chesterfield, and Virginia Beach decide that their kids are more safe at school and learning better at school, more serious education with the Republican governor, Youngkin's going to win.
Now, do you see that same sentiment echoing as obviously on the East Coast, the two big gubernatorial races are New Jersey and Virginia? Do you see if Youngkin, I think we are anticipating a win for him, if he wins and those are the issues that he's running on, do you see that having an impact on, the Maryland gubernatorial race or other races that are going to go on next year and similar issues being, a carrying factor?
I do. The key is what are we talking about? What are the issues? What's working? But the fact is that the 2022 federal elections are key to the United States of America. My own personal view is that Virginia at this point is doing a lot of harm to the people of the United States by continuing to vote for the Democrats the way they do. But we're not the only ones. There are other citizens, including in Maryland and places like that just keep on electing these Democrats. Well, the fact is that we only need to change 6 seats in the House of Representatives next year to stop all this craziness.
Yep.
To stop Nancy Pelosi from calling the military and trying to get them to do things improperly. To stop all this stuff, needs 6 seats. If things begin to move our way and it yields a candidacy or a successful candidacy in Virginia or New Jersey, then I think that we're on the right path. You can still blow it next year by doing the wrong things and talking about the wrong things. But I think we're on the right track at that point. It implies that the people of the United States, led by the people of Virginia, are beginning to wake up to what's going on and say, we reject this, we've got to do something different. And I have high hopes for 2022.
And you're preaching to the choir with Mark and I about continuing to elect Democrats. We live in Montgomery County, and I call it the People's Republic of Montgomery County because it's just, it doesn't get much more left than it is now. But I do think, having tuned into a couple of the Citizens Redistricting Commission calls, that we are going to see a lot less gerrymandered map come next year. And I think that gives us a lot of hope as well moving into the federal elections in 2022.
Well, I know the people in Montgomery County have a tendency to vote Democratic, but the fact is, don't you remember that old expression that was said, we all breathe the same air, we all treasure our children's future? Well, they treasure their children's future in Montgomery County too.
Yep.
So I think that if you begin to make it clear that the public schools of Montgomery County are going to poison the minds of their children, they're going to vote more Republican. And look, I'm not talking anti-African American here. If you continue to teach young African Americans that they're oppressed, then you persuade them that they can't succeed.
Right.
That is not what we have been doing and not what we should be doing. There seems to be a reversal going on here to try to actually beat the African American community down. I just talked about the Winsome Sears ad, which I think is kind of racist. So you got this stuff going on. And in the meanwhile, why would you ever teach the white community that they're oppressors at this point in time? The fact is that none of this is right. And we need to return back to a case where people have high aspirations for themselves and for their children's future, and the young people are taught to create incentive and opportunity, and trust in themselves and trust in their fellow man and trust in everybody else. When I ran for governor, I got a very substantial African American vote. And I delivered after that, by the way. I gave a lot of money to the African-American colleges in order to deliver on those promises. But I feel, I thought that things were going well, but the Democrats are pulling us into race division.
Yeah.
Into it. They're pulling it into it. So we all have to start thinking again about blacks and whites as opposed to people. It's very destructive. It might be good for their vote, but it's bad for the United States.
I mean, it is. It seems like the more you look at it, the way that they're trying to teach us that, or they're trying to teach children that white people are oppressors and black people are oppressed, that after 60 years, they're trying to move us back into segregation, that's what the Democrats want somehow.
Well, I think this is another opportunity for Republican leadership. I think that we don't have to buy into that. But it's very tough right now. You're beginning to be asking yourself, well, what do I think about as a white? Well, what do they think about as a black? That's not right.
Isn't that the curse? That is the curse of identity politics, is it sort of ends up taking issues and redefining, as opposed to the principles that were so well reflected by those late Virginians in Jefferson, Madison, and who were so important for the Constitution and setting up the principles in which our government society operates under.
Well, so while we're coming to the last few minutes here, Ambassador, we like to give you an opportunity to give any closing thoughts, plug anything you want to plug. I'm sure we'll have Dwight share out the article you were talking about on Fox News. But anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, over and above the politics, I think that I would like to just share with you all the ambassador experience. This was a case where I was over there representing the United States of America. I was the personal representative of President Trump, to be sure, but I never felt that I had any trouble with harmonizing Trump's foreign policy with what was in the best interest of the United States. I never found that to be a problem. And over there, I found that all this talk that we had seen, the allies hate Trump and they hate America now, it wasn't reflected at OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. We were trusted and liked and looked upon for leadership. The countries over there that are newly freed from the Russian Soviet Empire looked to the United States for leadership. And I found that we could do very constructive things. I also found, by the way, that talking about openness, democracy, liberty, these are the issues that caused us to win the Cold War in the first place. OSCE stood for that, and I was in a position to exercise that kind of authority. I worked very closely with the State Department during that time, and there are probably plenty of Democrats in the State Department, don't get me wrong, but they never bucked me. Well, one or two policy decisions where we split, but not much. We all worked together for the best interest of the United States diplomatically. Now, I remind you that President Biden fired every Republican worldwide. So he has at this point 80 or so vacancies among the ambassadorships across the entire planet. That is not in the best interest of the United States. I mean, he didn't have to keep all the Republicans. I'm not saying that. I'm a grown up and all that, but he should never have vacated all those seats. And now he's going to be a year and a half before he even gets his ambassadors out there. This is a critical moment in geopolitics. It's been made worse by the Afghan catastrophe. This is a delicate time, and we need to be serious about American foreign policy. And I think that we can still be, and we still are, the great power of the world. We still stand for what's right. People know we stand for what's right. They know we're backed by the best military in the world, Afghanistan notwithstanding. And as long as we stay faithful to our values and to our national strength, we're going to be fine.
Well, Ambassador Gilmore, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I think your message throughout has been one of optimism and hope. And definitely I learned something and I feel inspired, Mark. I don't know about you.
Absolutely.
But we'll definitely have to have you back on soon. It was so great chatting with you. And Mark, as usual, thank you so much for co-hosting with me and everybody watching. Thank you. And we'll be back next Wednesday with another exciting episode. Have a great night.